Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond-producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109-carat diamond, recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior, with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite and president of Venable Park Investment Council Incorporated. Welcome back to the show, Danielle.
Thank you, Jim.
We're asking the question, it seems rhetorical, but perhaps not. Who is running America right now?
Oh, well, I say that it's the same, culprits that have been running it for a long time already through the past few administrations, increasingly corporations, the largest corporations with a bunch of vested interests in keeping us all sick and using fossil fuels, eating bad food, and taking lots of drugs. That's who's running America, and that and the industrial military complex. But basically, I think, the thing that I think everyone's whipped up in a frenzy right now, whether they're on the right or the left. If you're, delighted that Trump got in, many of those people are sort of celebrating false concepts, like as if he's really a champion for the little guy, which is the most misguided statement probably I've heard in many, many years. But at the same time, those who are, shocked and appalled about Trump being the president, I think are in a small state of delusion or self-delusion, because truthfully, I think all that Trump is really doing here is he's knocked the varnish off. So nothing really looks civilized anymore. There's no, appearance of nicety in his discourse, in the way that he presents the cabinet ministers that he's putting forward. They're garishly self-interested, and they come from all the dominant sectors, and there's no sort of pretense around it. And I think in past administrations there's been more, pretense of them doing the right thing, or, even if industry heads from finance came into the cabinet in the last few administrations, which they certainly did. The finance sector's been calling the shots inside the White House for a very long time. I wrote about that in my first book 10 years ago, where I was saying, that governments who are greatly indebted need to maintain excellent relations with their bankers. That's the truth about who's been running the country. And so anyway, but now that Mr. Trump is there and he's appointing, the Goldman Sachs head, the Exxon Mobil head, the labor relations person he proposed, who thankfully backed down, but who was the head of these, junk food companies, which are paying people subsistence wages, and the only way they can afford to work for them is because the public purse is funding all the social programs to help feed their kids while they work full time for buttons. Those are the people that are in these key spots now in this cabinet, and so no one can kind of pretend that they're trying to do the right thing anymore. And I think that's a wake-up call for everyone. Or it should be. It should be a wake-up call to the left to say, hey, Trump was earned, and the Democrats in the past 8 years and their self-interested submission to corporate interests have really helped pave the way for this person to be brought into office. And really, there's a danger in how crazy it can get, no question. But I think there's also a bit of a catharsis potential in the honesty of this, so that people that were, perhaps inclined to complacency in the past have to look at this and be shocked. What is going on? You hear that from many sort of what you consider typically mainstream people saying, what is going on? Why is it so far right, so far left? Why are the media why is the media in fist fights all the time with this new administration? Why is everyone calling everyone a liar? Well, the truth is because there's another concept. Journalism and objective reporting has been greatly sullied in the past few years. The corporations that have gone and hoovered up all these independent so-called journalist entities have really become voice voices and soapboxes, bully pulpits, if you will, for corporate interests. So you've got the finance sector controlling, all the typical business news shows, so that they're populated by their representative espousing their view and their position on things, and you get a lot of even the CNNs of the world and the CBCs of the world went through a dark chapter. Under the Harper government, their funding was relentlessly cut, and they became more and more dependent on sponsorship, which typically comes from the industries that have the greatest cash flow. Guess what? That's drugs, that's energy like oil, and that's finance. So those are the sponsors who are paying the bills at the media outlets in the past years, and the message has definitely been tainted or shaped in favor of the sponsors. So it's partly true that we've got kind of fake news everywhere and not very rigorous reporting on both sides of issues. I just think the discussion that I put on from Susan Sarandon was a guest on one of the news outlets, and she was talking about this, and I had said this before Trump was elected as well, that it could bring the final tipping point in the revolution that needs to happen, or the catharsis that needs to happen, would be, this abrupt and rude awakening by people who have sort of thought things were better than they were the past few years in terms of who was looking out for the best interests of the country and of the people and all that stuff, which, none of them really were. And so we have this financial hollowing out. We've got carnage left and right. We've got debt left and right because we've been taking our advice from the finance sector. The Fed is a complete disaster. It was infiltrated, taken over, designed by the bankers for the bankers, and, with a direct line to the public purse. So you've got another article I put on is of the former bankers or former Fed officials, basically, who are coming forth and saying, writing books like Fed Up, which is a new book that's just come out from one of the Dallas Fed assistants who worked there for almost the past 10 years, and her book is called Fed Up, An Insider's Take on Why the Federal Reserve is Bad for America. And of course it's bad for America. The whole preoccupation with liquidity and debt as a way of compelling people to spend in destructive ways to keep padding the pockets of certain franchises and certain sectors at the expense of everything else. That's what's been going on for at least the last 20 years. So I know we're having to, the pendulum really got pushed so far in favor of those who are extracting and hollowed out the strength and stability so much that we now have to have this sort of painful swinging back of this pendulum to kind of restore some balance to the system. And I think it's going to continue to be a volatile, shocking time. Ultimately, I think if we'd have had a continuation of more of the status quo and a more calm kind of environment, it wouldn't have been a good thing either. So I think it's good that we're having this revelation and sort of awareness coming into more mainstream arguments. But, here's the other thing, Jim, which I think is really important in this whole piece, and we've talked about this before. Ultimately, this political stuff, longer term, there's no question that governments and policies impact the societies for better and worse. There's no question. But in terms of when a new government comes in, the first term, the 4-year presidential cycle, that's very much dictated or handed to, inherited by the conditions they find themselves in terms of the prior period, right? So the business cycle circles through and presidents go along for that ride. So the trouble with Trump right now is that he's proposed two main things that matter in terms of the math and the economy and the financial aspect of this. And that is that he's proposed that his new plan is going to get the growth rate in America up to 4% out to 2020. Well, the math just defies all logic because it's been averaging just over barely 2% since 2009 in this so-called recovery. And that's with, think about it, trillions of debt, of liquidity thrown at it from central banks all over the world, as well as people taking on record amounts of debt again. So you've got debt all up in business, corporations, households, governments, everywhere you look. And he's planning that he's going to miraculously double the growth rate, even in that context and with demographics, aging population, all that. So that's highly unlikely. And anyone, even the people who love to sell the growth stories, the Morgan Stanleys and Goldman Sachses of the world, they do the math and can't come up with anywhere close to 4%. They'd say, even if he got all of his proposals passed, he'd be lucky to get a 2% growth rate. In fact, they're looking forward and expecting the growth rate to drop over the next few years with his policies. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we are now in the midst of the third longest expansion since the last recession, since 1870. So probabilities-wise, we're highly likely to have a recession sometime in the next 4 years, perhaps sooner than later. So that's just a function, and that wouldn't be caused by Trump. That would be a function of him coming into office, as we've said, after, 92 months of expansion since the last recession. So what that really tells you is that it's highly probable that we'll get an economic downturn in this presidential cycle. In terms of political risk, it would be better for him if it happened sooner than later in his term, right? If it happened in this year and the next two, he could still feasibly argue, and justifully so in many ways, that was baked in the cake and that he inherited a mess and, the downturn was inevitable. But he would also perhaps benefit from the mean reversion that could happen in the second half of his term, because once the economy's rolled over for a couple of years, you can generally expect it to begin to turn back up. So I think politically speaking, it'd be better for him if it happens sooner. If it happens later in his term, that would be more likely to keep him a one-term wonder, because people will then blame him for the downturn.
And Trump, in turn, will blame the media.
Oh, yes. Well, I have this, sense, when you were a kid and you were in the playground and you'd get into arguments with other kids that were irrational or unreasonable, and it would always be, I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I think that's the level of discourse that we're witnessing here between, the Trump admin. They're not very good with their words, let's face it, and they tend to have this sort of level of childishness in their banter. But again, I've said there's legitimate reasons why the media hasn't been doing a great job or is not journalistically acute over the past few years. I'm not saying there's no justification in many of those comments, but I'm just saying that the far right-wing media, the Fox Newses and the Breitbarts and these other organizations that Trump says is the truthful news or the non-fake news, is also equally flawed and biased and skewed and hopelessly unreliable in the same way. So you've really got these two extreme examples of what not to do in journalism, and you've got them batting back and forth in a childish way. Another thing that I think is really worth mentioning here, and I wrote about it on the blog this week, is, this business genius stuff. Boy, you get that thick and fast, right? Trump's a business genius, so, he knows how to fix all this. It's like, don't worry, we're the business leaders. We're here to turn this all around. But the truth of the matter is that his record as a business leader, business owner, businessman has been incredibly fraught with lucky timing and questionable moves, several bankruptcies, 4, I think, in the last 25 years. Lots of creditors lost tons of money. One of the big stories, which I think is always worth mentioning, is the stock market is there to provide liquidity for funders, for founders. So Trump is no different. So, he had the issuance of his Trump hotels and casino resorts, which came out as a new issue in something like 1994. And of course, he pumped up the story, and it was the art of the deal, and it was all about his genius. And of course, the stock plunged to a fraction of its former self. So he cashed out. Good for him. Got a huge payout. The people who bought the story, thinking that he was a genius and he was going to help them become wealthy, got shafted. And that's really what the stock market is typically there to do. It's there to provide a promise or a hope or a pump and dump scheme for founders who are looking to have their liquidity event. So the only way the average person can profit, typically in that type of a rigged kind of system, is to not buy what you're being sold and to wait for the liquidation that always comes. Initial public offerings are notorious for being horrendous investments. They come out with all the finance companies pumping the story, selling it through the distribution, telling everyone what a wonderful everything is, but at that point it's priced for perfection, and then thereafter it tends to either dramatically lose money or do nothing very much for years thereafter. So the best way to handle this is to anticipate that, to know that, and to pay attention to these really hot stories that everyone's, touting, pumping, and selling, and wait for when it's all a total disaster and everyone's mad and the thing's fallen by a lot. And that's when it makes some sense to take some risk with your capital, but not when, you're buying what they're selling with great confidence.
We'll have more with Danielle Park right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Danielle Park. Danielle, is it good news for Canada that Prime Minister Trudeau seems to me touring the world promoting free trade and the first Canadian Prime Minister to address the EU?
Well, many of the comments I just made about the Trump administration apply in a different way to the Trudeau administration, because ultimately, again, they inherited the economy such as it was when they came into power just over a year ago, and the poor investments that had been made, the poor tax incentives that had been in place, the doubling down on the oil and gas sector at the expense of everything else, really was a bad investment decision, but that was made for 8 years with the Harper government before Trudeau even took the seat. The underfunding of social programs, the bad planning for, the Canada Pension Plan, the not setting aside enough for the upcoming slowdown, which was inevitable and baked in the cake, the not, slowing the pace of consumer debt that was building all these risks into the Canadian economy, not making Canada competitive in the global trade scene. All that was, policies that had been in place for the past decade when everyone was riding the easy money on the commodities bubble. So, they come in and inherit that condition, and again, highly likely to experience a recession, again, for the exact same reasons in Trudeau's first term as in Trump. So, he's really dealing with a very unfortunate hand right from the outset. The Canadian debt levels are ludicrous. The demographics are not favorable, and we don't really have an obvious way to quickly replace the lost revenue from the oil and gas sector, and that's obviously a big problem in terms of cash flow. So I think, does Mr. Trudeau appear to be more civilized? Of course. I think anyone that watched the press conference between Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau in Washington this week, it was quite comical actually, because as Mr. Trudeau kept flipping in and out of French and Mr. Trump's face was priceless, remembering, oh yeah, they gave me an earpiece, right, I'm supposed to put that in, and you see him stumbling with that, and it was actually, I'm sure it'll be on Saturday Night Live next, because it was quite funny to watch. But again, these are figureheads, and the powers that be, are really they're not able to make a huge difference, and certainly not in their first term in the seat. So as far as how the world perceives right now, I'm sure Canada's always had a pretty good reputation. I think that we've always been seen to be a more tolerant, multicultural country, and I think that's all quite true. And, am I happy that I've got more of a Mr. Trudeau representation for the country that I love than a Mr. Trump representation at this point? Yes, but that's not really about politics. That's just about, values and perception and who do we have as our head sales guy kind of thing, right? But again, if I look at who and what has been governing the Canadian economy and where we've been investing, I'm not very happy with the portrait here at home either. And I think, again, finance and big oil and pharma have really been driving the bus here as well. We've got a lot of junk food places that are giving crappy wages, and calling that job creation. So I think we have a lot of really sober reflection and investment to do. And I think this polarizing of party stuff really misses the point. It's got nothing to do with, this who's a liar back and forth banter. It's got to do with how can we reinvent ourselves for the 21st century, given the incidence of technology, robots coming in to take jobs, the health crisis that's all over the world, but certainly in North America, the savings crisis that's all over the world and really profound in North America. How can we rebuild the coffers, rebuild the strength, and rebuild the self-reliance of the people? And I know we can do it, but it's not a quick fix, and it's not going to be done from the top down, by throwing a few dollars here and there. It's going to be having to make substantive tax system changes to put different incentives in place. It's going to have to be, probably user fees and things like the healthcare system, where you put more onus back on individuals to look after their own health. It's going to be, curtailing some of the junk food that's poisoning the population. We're going to have to make more intelligent decisions, which have more than a few months of view as you look forward. The benefits don't come in a 6-month window typically. These are long-term investments. But I think, what's our choices? Like, really, at the end of the day, we don't have a lot of choice. You can't keep riding the pine. You can't keep riding something that's no longer like the commodities bubble that's now behind us, world's awash in excess capacity. That's not coming back for many years here, and that means we are going to have to reinvent ourselves. So, necessity, the mother of invention, I think we can do it. But again, it's calling bull on some of these systems that have been very dangerous and destructive, like the finance sector, like the Federal Reserves and central banks pumping liquidity and hoping for the best. We really do need to change their mandate, get them back to a stability mandate, stop this share buyback nonsense that's been prolific throughout this period, and get companies focused on managing their business, investing in things that matter, not just buying back financial assets. I was looking at the South Sea bubble, which was this episode in the 1700s of this company where they were, issuing shares on the promise supposedly of trade in South America, but that wasn't happening. It was all a big Ponzi scheme, and the company was, the founders were using cash to buy back the shares, pumped it all up, and then it all collapsed. Really, it's exactly the same playbook that's been in play now for the past 9 years again, where it's financialization and fake. So what we need is some actual organic things that matter and fundamental investment. So I think, again, when we get to this period of disappointing growth, when the honeymoon phase is over, when the recession comes in, which it inevitably will, we'll get this cleaning and clean house time again, and that'll give us another opportunity to do it better the next time.
Danielle, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Hey, thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Danielle Park. Her website is jugglingdynamite.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. If you have any questions for us, you can email us at info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.